Shall we start?
Yes.
Okay. Dear colleagues and distinguished guests, first of all, I'd like to welcome you to the 7th International Symposium on Digital Forensics and Security. As one of the organizing members of the event, I'd like to just give you a glimpse of today's events. First of all, Dr. Manuela Cruz Cunha is going to make her opening speech. That is going to be followed by Dr. Asaf Varol's opening remarks. Right after that, we are going to have our first keynote talk that will be presented actually at 2:30. That will be followed by a coffee break. Today's only parallel sessions going to start at 4 p.m. and we expect those sessions to end before or at 5:30. Gala dinner for the conference is going to be held at 7 p.m. at Bigueira Hotel, am I spelling correctly? Bigueira Hotel and Restaurant in Barcelos, so it's not that far away. Just a couple of things. Today is Portugal National Day, isn't it? So normally the school is closed, we don't have any students, we don't have any audience other than you over here. Tomorrow we expect that it will be a little bit more crowded. I would like to thank Dr. Cunha and other colleagues to opening this door to us for today. Also, just to let you know, with your registration, you should have received some tickets on the back side of your tags. Just keep those with you because when it's being asked, you may need to give it to the personnel. Without taking too much of your time, let's start with the first item on the agenda. Therefore, I'd like to let Dr. Manuela Cruz Cunha for her welcome speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Dear colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is with a great pleasure that, on behalf of the Presidency of the Polytechnic Institute of Cabo Delgado and of the Director of the School of Technology and also of the organization, I address you all a warm welcome. Welcome to Barcelos, welcome to the Polytechnic Institute of Cabo Delgado, and welcome to one more edition of the International Symposium on Digital Forensic and Security. We are very honored to know that many of you had a long day of journey and several of you were able to cross continents to join us for this event. And we are very honored also to host this 7th edition of the event. Thank you very much, Professor Asaf Varol, for inviting our Polytechnic Institute to the ISDF organization consortium when we met in 2013 here in Barcelos, and for giving us the opportunity to organize one more edition of this event, this time in Portugal. Just to complement the information given by the introduction of Professor Murat, you find strange that the Higher Education Institute is empty. Well, students are not here also because the classes ended last week and examinations will start within 2 weeks. So this is a period where students look for the professors if they have any problems when preparing themselves for the examinations. Not many students, meaning that they are very good or that they are not studying as they should. But, okay, this is one motive. The other is that we celebrate today a very important national holiday. We celebrate the Day of Portugal, the Day of Camões, and of the Portuguese communities. It is a national holiday. This date pays tribute to our poet Luís de Camões, considered to be one of the greatest figures of the Portuguese literature and one of the greatest poets in the Western tradition, Western poetry tradition, of course. And he's author of the Lusíadas, our epic work, and he died on this day in 1580, on the 16th century. Lusíadas is considered the Portuguese epic by excellence. It is a humanistic epic poem which tells the history of the poet, the Portuguese sailors, the Portuguese heroes who sailed around the south of Africa and opened a maritime path, a maritime route from Europe, from Western Europe to India. This route existed by land, of course, but it was the first time it was opened by sea. These discoveries were the motive of pride and the reason of the national identity of those times of the 16th century. And on that time, our leitmotif was to give new worlds to the world. It's how the Portuguese people felt themselves 500 years ago. And this is also considered the Day of the Portuguese Language. I would also like to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about Barcelos. Barcelos, as you already know, you are here, is a northern city with 2,000 inhabitants, while the whole municipality has more than 100,000 inhabitants. It is an important industrial center in the north of Portugal, namely in the ceramic sector. Poetry has a long tradition on this region, as well as the textile industry. Barcelos is one of the oldest Portuguese territories, recognized by the first king of Portugal in the 12th century. If you have time and you want to visit, or if you enjoy architecture, you should visit some important monuments we have here in Barcelos since the medieval times, with some Gothic monuments up to some Baroque style monuments. Well, Barcelos is also close to the sea. It's around 15 kilometers from the sea and 50 kilometers from Porto, which is the second largest Portuguese city. Those who decided to participate in the social program of Wednesday, I talk about that a little bit towards the end, but for those who decide to participate in the social program, we'll have the opportunity to visit some small towns nearby our beautiful, I'm Portuguese, I should say, beautiful northern Atlantic coast. And since we are at IPCA, I must talk also a little bit to introduce you my institution, my home institution. The Polytechnic Institute of Cabo and Ave is the youngest Portuguese higher education institution, public higher education institute, and is celebrating this year the 25th anniversary. It has around 4,700 students. It has 4 schools: the School of Technology, where we are, the School of Management, School of Design, and the School of Hospitality and Tourism. And this school is a teenager of 16 years old. The School of Technology offers graduation and master degrees on informatics engineering, engineering on development of digital games, medical informatics, electronics and computing, and industrial engineering. And this year we are starting also a post-graduation on cybersecurity. And we have also a research center on applied artificial intelligence. Finally, just some words of recognition to the authors who selected this event to publish and make public their work, to the scientific committee members for their important role in evaluating submissions and giving constructive comments to the authors, to the organizing team, both the international organizing team and our local organizing team in IPCA. And thank you, dear participants, for being here. Thank you for selecting this conference to present, discuss, and publish your research. I hope we will have 2 days of interesting debate and exchange of ideas and experiences. And Professor Asaf Varol will address you also some welcoming words and some useful information about the conference. And after, I will give you some information about the social program, and then we'll have our keynote session. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for the welcome speech, Dr. Cunha. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Asaf Varol for his welcome speech.
Hello everyone. First of all, I would like to welcome you to our conference, and I am very glad to see a lot of people from around the world, and more than 22 countries are represented here. But today is a holiday, and therefore we don't have more people, but I hope tomorrow we will have some people from who will come to here and join to our conference. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 7th International Symposium on Digital Forensics and Security here in Barcelos, Portugal. We are very grateful to Polytechnic Institute of Quevedo and EVE for their tremendous support they have provided as host, and to the conference organizing committee, whose members have put together an engaging program. Today, ISDFS, bringing together researchers, scientists, and industry partners from 22 different countries, including the USA, China, Romania, Japan, and Slovakia, to meet and share ideas and stimulate discussions in digital forensics, information security, and other fields of computer science. We all witnessed that cloud technologies, big data, and software industry have evolved at an impressive pace over the last decade. In the meantime, cybersecurity and digital forensics fields have been exponentially growing to address the needs and draw the high-tech industry to new heights. Because of demand in digital forensics and information security in general, Pratt University and Sam Houston State University initiated the series of this international symposium in 2012. Later, other consortium members, Gazi University, University of Arkansas at Little Rock, University of Medicine, Pharmacy, Sciences and Technology of Tirgun Mureş, Arab Open University, San Diego State University, Hacettepe University, Balıkesir University, Youngstown State University, Başkent University, Havelsan, and Cybersecurity of Turkey were joined to the force. One other member of this consortium is Polytechnic Institute of Quevedo and EVE, who joined in 2013. After holding the first 6 series of the symposium successfully, with the experience gathered over those previous insightful events, we are certain that such a gathering today with top researchers and industry leaders will help move the academia and industry forward. This 7 events technical program is organized into 4 tracks: digital forensics, information security, data privacy, and cryptography and computer science in general. 3 keynote speakers are invited to the conference and share their knowledge today and tomorrow. Dr. Peter Cooper will discuss about distributed ledgers as a support system for digital evidence management. Dr. Nuno Ricardo Matheus Correia will give a talk about information security challenges, paranoid operating system perspective. And finally, Dr. Şeref Sağaroğlu will talk about cybersecurity and big data issues in Turkey. Scientific sessions and complete sketches can be found in the abstract book. I would like to remind a couple of things. This event is supported by IEEE and papers will be published through IEEE Explorer. Once it is published, we will make that announcement so that you will be aware of it. Gala dinner will be held at Bagaria Hotel and Restaurant this evening at 7 p.m. The following year's event is already scheduled. 8th event of ISDFS will be held in Beirut, Lebanon by Arab Open University, and Dr. Hasan Sebeiti will provide this event to us, but it was not possible for him to join today's session, and he will come tomorrow. You should have received flyers for the event during the registration, and now let's show a small glimpse on Beirut. Next year, I hope everybody will be there.
agencies?
Lebanon and Beirut, and I hope next year we will have this organization between June 1st and 2nd. Before I close my talk, first I like to extend my appreciation to scientific committee members for their help during the paper review process. Without their on-time feedback and effort, we would not be able to move forward. Second, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to all of the consortium members for helping ISDFS to grow each year. Third, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Symposium co-chairs and program chairs, registration and arrangement committee and publication committee members for all their efforts within the past several months and organize this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barcelos, for your welcome speech. I think we are on time, so the next thing that we are going to do is listen to a keynote talk, actually. But before we move on to that, Dr. Queen has some announcements to make. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor. As I told you in my opening talk, I want to share with you some information about the social program for next Wednesday. At 9:30, a bus will pick us here in Barcelos. At around 10 o'clock, we will be received at the municipality of Esposende, as I told you, a town on the coast, on the Atlantic coast. And then we'll have a visit, a guided visit to an old village with degustation of local products. At 12 o'clock, we'll visit also two small towns, Ofir, Apulia, and a beach called Ofir. We'll have lunch at Apulia, and at the afternoon we have a visit to a natural park with a small trip in a boat on the river, and by 6 p.m. we will return to Barcelos.
Okay.
Now it's over.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cunha. If you are interested in this event, you need to visit the registration desk by tomorrow noon, so that you can register, so that way we will have the number of people who are interested in attending this event. So next one is our keynote talk. Dr. Peter Cooper is going to talk about distributed ledgers as a support system for digital evidence management. A little bit biography from Dr. Cooper. He's a professor and chair of the computer science department at Sempozyumunun State University. Dr. Cooper has been the principal investigator in 5 medium to large scale federally funded research and development projects, including 3 through Department of Justice and Bureau of Justice Administration. Dr. Cooper is responsible for the development of Sempozyumunun State's PhD program in digital and cyber forensic science and master's programs in information assurance and security and digital forensics. Dr. Cooper teaches network security, malware analysis, and cyber warfare and terrorism. Dr. Cooper has 10 years of experience in K-12 education and 2 years of experience in higher education. Dr. Cooper?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm afraid that 30 years of higher education is more like 34 years now, and every year it seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. If I may make a small joke, after the events of last night on the football field, maybe Portugal should consider having a 2-day holiday. My talk today is on distributed ledgers as a support system for digital evidence management. And I really want to start by connecting what I'm saying this year to what I said last year. At last year's conference, I spoke to you about the need for systemic change in the way we do digital forensics. Basically, we are, from a digital forensics perspective, we are still in the Stone Age. We are still in the last millennium. The ground is shifting beneath our feet. The devices that we use have changed. The way we use devices has changed. the mismatch between CPU speeds and memory speeds and disk speeds is growing exponentially. And we no longer store data on our devices. We store data across multiple constitutional amendments. Is something that will probably end up at the Supreme Court at some point. The same commentary can be made in the European context because similar protections exist. We have device proliferation. How many of you here have more than one mobile device with you right now? I do. I've only got two. Usually I have three, but I only have two right now. That is a problem. There are many situations where you'll find somebody will have more than one cell phone because they'll have one for work and one for home, and they'll have a tablet and they'll have a laptop. So the number of devices that we are using is proliferating, but more importantly, the number of people in the world that have multiple devices is also proliferating. Now, approximately half of the world's population have mobile devices. And that's without considering issues like the Internet of Things, where you may have, instead of multiple, hundreds of devices in your home, in your car, on your person, at your office. So we have a problem there. But because we have those devices, that means those devices potentially contain evidence whenever a crime is committed. I listed there's a growth in digital crime. I don't really mean that. What I mean is that there is a growth in the application of digital evidence to all sorts of crimes. So whereas somebody might commit a murder 20, 30 years ago, now they commit a murder and they have a cell phone on them, which means that we can identify their location at a given point in time if we have the right permissions. If you commit an armed robbery, we know where you were at a given point in time, or at least we know where your devices were, which is not quite the same thing, but important nonetheless. We now have non-persistent storage. We're moving out of the era of disk drives into the era of solid-state drives. The forensic approach for solid-state devices is not the same as for hard drives. So we have some changes that occur. And all this in a context of coming out of a recession 11 years ago, where money for equipment, money for training, money for new officers, money for research to develop new techniques is simply not there globally. So I suggested last year that what we do is that we change the way in which we do our jobs. I suggested at that point that we should move away from a device-centric approach to a case-centric approach. In other words, we're not really necessarily interested in everything that is on that device, only the information that is relevant to the case. That potentially means we might not completely image drives, as you'll see later on. We need to move away from data acquisition to information acquisition. Right now, because we're taking a complete image of a drive and then searching through that drive for evidence, maybe we could operate a different way. Maybe we could start with the information and look for specific pieces of evidence without necessarily trawling through an entire device. We need to develop integrated and automated tools, and we can't do that until we have integrated systems at a regional or a national or an international level. We need to industrialize our processes, and again, we can't do that until we're dealing with this on a regional country basis. And so we need to provide regional and national resources rather than local resources. If I were a marketing consultant for Encase, I would be so happy with the current situation, because I can sell the end-case toolkit to every single police department. And I can make my money off hundreds, thousands of police departments. And I'm making a very nice fat profit for my company. I would not like for a country to provide a single, integrated, distributed system for digital forensics, because then I could only sell to one. So we need to move away from the kind of financial mechanisms that we use to provide digital forensic services to our communities. And so I suggested that what I'd like to do is provide a framework for distributed parallel analysis mechanisms. So what I'm going to do today is talk about trying to achieve some of those goals, not all of them. Okay? To begin with, let's address the issue related to the increase in data storage that we've seen. We've seen, if you take it on a log scale, it's approximately linear. So that means it's geometric growth in the capacity of storage devices since the 1980s. It's been pretty consistent. Last year, Samsung brought out a 32 terabyte, 1.5 inch form factor solid state drive. That means it can fit in a laptop. It's 32 terabytes. That was last year. Unfortunately, Seagate has now brought out a 60 terabyte solid state drive. So the situation is getting worse, and it's getting worse by doubling pretty much every year. Our current devices can handle up around 100 megabytes per second transfer rate. If you take a 60 terabyte drive and you want to image it, and you are running your transfer rate at 100 megabytes per second, that's 6.9 days. It's going to take you a week simply to image that drive. If you go and buy the best possible equipment, that's going to be USB 3. You can get, technically, you can get 540 megabytes per second. Reality is that none of the devices on the market will actually function at that speed. So we have a problem. The actual performance, however, in the field is much worse than those ideal conditions. So the actual performance when you're trying to image a drive is a function of the sustained transfer rate of the source device. So if you're dealing with a brand new 60 terabyte SSD, you're going to get a good transfer rate out of that SSD. That's fine, that'll work. But it's also a function of the cable transfer speed. It's a function of the throughput that your write blocker provides, because you're going to run that device through a cable, through a write blocker, through another cable to your target device. And then you have to deal with the write speed, not the read speed, the write speed of the target device where you're going to hold that image. Well, there's going to be a bottleneck somewhere. You're either dealing with somebody's old device, in which case it's not going to have the throughput on the read end. You're dealing with older equipment in terms of cables and write blockers, or you're dealing with older equipment for your target devices. Now, I don't know what your local police station can manage in terms of funding, but you only need to be a year behind the curve, and your problems get significantly worse. Ideal conditions are rarely encountered, and somewhere there's a roadblock, and somewhere there's got to be funding for police departments, and quite frankly, if you're funding police departments on a local or small scale level, you're not going to have the funding to maintain the equipment that you need to do the forensic analysis that you want. So the time and storage costs represent a significant obstacle when evidence is processed on single, isolated systems located within individual police departments. And so if you think about those statements, and if you accept the veracity of those statements, the obvious conclusion is we have got to stop doing this. It doesn't make sense in today's day and age to be working in essentially an artisanal mode where you have an individual investigator, an individual analyst who is working with an individual workstation in an isolated environment. So what I want to do then is I want to have a little bit of a segue before I say what we should be doing and talk about distributed ledgers. Now, some of you know something about distributed ledgers and some of you don't. So I'm trying to find a middle path here so that everybody gets something out of it. I'm talking about distributed ledgers rather than talking about blockchain, which is what everybody looks at when they first think about distributed ledgers. You've all heard of Bitcoin, yes? Okay. How many of you know how Bitcoin operates? A few, not many. Well, let me give you the layman's 20,000-foot look at it. Essentially, blockchain is the supporting mechanism for Bitcoin and a few others. Blockchain works like this. We take some sort of contract and we process it through an encryption mechanism, and we produce a block of data from that encryption mechanism. Now, I just don't do this on my own. This is a distributed ledger, and so many people process that same data in the same way to produce the same block. And because these are generated independently, what we can do is then say, everybody who has processed this block, will you agree on what this block should be like? Can you tell me that your block is identical to my block, is identical to many other blocks around the world? If everybody can agree, it's a consensus mechanism, then that block is trusted. The next time there's some sort of contractual arrangement, the same process occurs, but at the same time, that second block is cryptographically attached to the first block. And thus, over a period of time, you connect a series of these blocks where each block is dependent on the previous block, and you end up with a chain of blocks, hence we call it blockchain. Because the processing is CPU intensive, it becomes infeasible to change a previous block. Because you have to change that block, and you have to change all the subsequent ones in such a way that you can still achieve consensus. And that is computationally impossible, infeasible. And so blockchain becomes a completely distributed, secure mechanism for establishing whether contracts have been agreed or not. So that's blockchain. It is only one distributed technology. The second one is, so let me just go through what the characteristics are. First of all, it's public. Anybody can join. Secondly, it's unmanaged. There isn't some central server managing this thing. It is based on proof of work. That is, your CPU has to do some fairly heavy number crunching in order for you to be able to identify the correct block. It's based on proof of stake. That is, you don't start creating blocks unless you have some, in America, what we call skin in the game. If you don't have anything, if you're not part of the process, you shouldn't be making these blocks in the first place. because it is CPU intensive, it's slow. And finally, no, I already said CPU intensive. So that's blockchain. And when people talk about blockchain, they talk about Bitcoin. And a number of people make the assumption that distributed ledgers means the same thing as blockchain. Well, that's not correct. There are other distributed ledger technologies that exist which have somewhat different characteristics. The second one that I want to talk about then is Ethereum. Ethereum is a semi-blockchain. It requires somewhat less work than blockchain, but Ethereum is based on non-standard hardware. We have binary systems in our computers. Ethereum is based on a three-state mechanism. And as such, it's much more difficult to work with, except through the use of virtual machines. Ethereum also is public and unmanaged. It also operates primarily on proof of work. So generally we use a virtual machine to emulate the hardware that is supposed to be used for Ethereum. Both Ethereum and blockchain were expressly developed for the same purpose, and that is digital currency mining. Our third one, Hashgraph, was not. Hashgraph operates different. It's permission-oriented. It's not based on proof of work. It's based on being allowed into a particular implementation. It's privately managed and operates on its own network communication mechanism. And essentially, it is a continuous consensus building model. So you'll have a number of nodes that are operating. Each node is communicating with the others, saying, this is what I know. And the other nodes are responding, this is what I know you know. And we can go down that rabbit hole a number of levels. But essentially, they're communicating work that they are doing, and at some point, everybody has a consensus on a certain block of that work. Both Ethereum and Hashgraph come with Java-like, C#-like language support for the development of what we call smart contracts. So the proof of work and proof of stake characteristics imply that blockchain and Ethereum are slow, and we're already dealing with slow in a digital forensics context, so those are not particularly useful. Hashgraph is fast, but if the Hashgraph company can produce its own private network in order to move communication across nodes, then surely we can develop our own. Okay, so each approach relies on the generation of ledger entries that are validated through a consensus mechanism across a distributed system. Changes in the ledger can only be achieved through consensus, making the falsification of the ledger computationally infeasible. And of course, they use the word ledger because all of this was financial data that was being done. But in terms of a digital forensics environment, a ledger entry is no different than an evidence management system entry. And so we can apply the same techniques and the same technologies to evidence management as we can to financial transactions. So here is what I'm going to suggest. Oh yes, this is what we do right now. So we take some media, and from that media we do we generate an image, and that's really our big bottleneck. That's our time-consuming portion. And then we do a file system analysis from which we derive images, videos, documents, email, social media traces, and so on. That takes some time. And then once we've done that, what we want to do is we want to check the remainder of the device to see if there are items that have been deleted, items that have been hidden in slack space, and so on. So we go through a file carving process. And if you think 6.9 days to image a 32 terabyte solid state drive is a long time, file carving is a much slower process. But we do that because we want to have all the evidence. So we don't want to miss anything that would impact the a case. And so typically a defense attorney's first question is, do you have all the evidence? And if the process has not been completed, then the answer to that question is no. And well, there may be something on that drive that would exonerate my client. And so we have to deal with that to a certain extent. So what I'm suggesting then is we modify our mechanism just a little bit in a number of different ways. And the first way is that we're going to somewhat parallelize this. Okay? If you are taking data from a medium and you are creating an image, why aren't you creating multiple images? It doesn't take any, it takes more storage, but it doesn't take any more time to create 3 images than it does 1. And that gives us some options, because that means that we can run processes on multiple images simultaneously. So I'm going to parallelize this so that I can do a file system analysis, and I can also do my file carving at the same time in order to produce some results. I'm going to take a third image because I want a reference image so that I can demonstrate that doing those 2 processes has not altered the original image in any way. So I have a reference image and 2 working images. But I want to go a step further than that. I do not want to do a complete file system analysis. Any file system that we have is a collection of operating system files, environmental data, application files, and user files. Interrogating the operating system, and particularly in Windows, interrogating the registry, will give us information about the operating system build and any major pieces of application software that we have installed on the system. We can, if we want to, remove those items from consideration. So what I'm going to propose is that we do a pre-analysis stage where we remove all good known files. So all of our operating systems files can be removed. All of our application files can be removed. And that leaves us with a subset of the file system, which is essentially user files. Now that is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, by removing those known good files, you end up with a smaller set of files that you have to process, which means that your processing time is decreased. The second reason why you would do that is because if your system has been compromised, then compromised files will remain within that file system subset because they will not match the uncompromised file's signatures. So that allows us to eliminate objects associated with major application files leaving a file system subset containing only user files, and those are really the only ones that we want to consider. So what we would do then is we would do a recursive descent through the file system, checking the hashes of every file that we encounter through that recursive descent, and then eliminating it if it's a known good file and keeping it if it's not a known good file. Okay, so we end up with a somewhat sparse file system subset. Measurement by eye suggests that that would actually remove about 2/3 of the data from the file system. But we can go a stage further, and this is where I want to refer back to blockchain. We need to be able to demonstrate that this file system subset has integrity. So what we should do then is with that tree, we should take a hash of every object within that tree and then create a block that is representative of that tree, which is a function of the hashes that we obtain through that subset. We can then make sure that that image is available to multiple devices who would use the same process to get the same block, and we can get a consensus model across a distributed system that says this file system subset has integrity. And then we can chain that, first of all, to case metadata and to other evidence associated with that case to produce a ledger entry. And then as other cases come forward, we can create similar ledger entries and create a ledger chain of evidence that we are sure has integrity. Now, this is not going to be in the initial phases. This is not going to be a replacement for our current processes. But if we are able to retain our current processes and implement these new processes over a period of time, the courts will come to accept the new processes. Case law will be sufficiently built to allow that. There will be precedents that lawyers can refer to. And in doing so, we will be able to discard over a period of time the device-centric approach that we currently use. So this is what I'm suggesting. We start with an image, we apply all of the known good files to remove them and end up with user files. We go through some hashing process to create a hash tree, and our hash tree becomes our ledger entry. Now, the specifics of how best to do that to make sure that the ledger entry is not too unwieldy and at the same time to minimize the processing required, that's a matter for experimental work. So if we have those ledger entries, and those ledger entries contain sufficient information, then not only can we tell whether that file system subtree has been modified, but we can tell where it's been modified. And the mechanism that I'm suggesting here not only preserves the files themselves, but preserves the directory structures as well. So if you change the directory structure, you change the ledger entry. Okay. So what I want to move to now is digital forensics as a service. Now, this is a term, we were doing this back in 2010. This was the next big thing back in 2010, and we talked about it in the department, and some people in business and industry went on board, and they are now hosting forensic services in the cloud. That's great. We would have been able to recover that evidence, and we would have been able to prosecute as we should have done. Distributing the evidence allows for a balanced caseload. Obviously, Houston, Dallas, Lisbon, London, they all have very good digital forensics capabilities, they have well-trained people, they have the resources to do the job, and so on. But Huntsville, Texas doesn't. There are many parts of the country where the crimes are being committed and the equipment, the tools, and the expertise are not there. If you distribute evidence, you can call in expertise from across the country or across the state in order to process what you need to process. Distributing the evidence encourages standardized protocols. The way in which one police department operates is not necessarily the same way as another police department operates. Distributing the tools, as I made reference to in case earlier, can result in lowering the costs. If your tools are distributed, if your tools are in the cloud and anybody can access them if they have authorization, then you don't have to buy so many copies. Distributing the evidence also supports a single evidence management system. Right now there are competing systems out there in the market. It would be a lot better if at a state or national or even supranational level we settled on a single evidence management system that would allow us to move information about evidence from one point to another. And if you're going to distribute it, then you're going to need to be able to provide permissions for people to work on cases. So we need some characteristics of this system. We need to be able to be sure that anything that moves across communication lines is encrypted. The last thing that we need is for somebody to be attacking a system that is supposed to manage evidence, because that would not be a good thing. We obviously, if we're going to encrypt everything, then we have to have a single coherent key management scheme for managing access to that evidence. And that key control has to reside within the originating department, primarily because the department was the one that collected the evidence and they don't want anybody else to see it unless they specifically ask. The key should be applied to individuals. That would be the initial analyst, local analysis teams, and remote analysis personnel. So we have some evidence that we want to process. We don't have the resources to process it here. Let's outsource this to other departments that do have that, those facilities or those skills. The ability for police departments to then interface seamlessly with national agencies is an added bonus in this. So what I'm suggesting is that we should be producing a single countrywide evidence management system, distributed system for the storage and analysis of evidence. And finally, to suggest that this is something that is probably the domain of a government, academia initiative. It is something that the government doesn't have the resources to deal with, the intellectual resources to deal with. It's something that universities do have the resources to deal with. So some sort of partnership between government and academia is probably the way to go. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I've done 43 minutes of my hour, which means that I have time for questions if anybody has some.
questions. I have one.
Yes.
Well, obviously the benefits of distributed system is laid out well, but let's say if we all agree to conduct this type of work, how long is it going to take the law enforcement people, including judges and lawyers, to be on board? Because even accepting memory forensics as an evidence took a lot of time. So this
right now, department chiefs in the state of Texas have to do training every couple of years. We need to insert a digital forensics element in there so that the management of those police stations has some understanding. I don't know how long. I will probably long be retired before they accept it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite Dr. Cunha so that she can present a plaque to Dr. Cooper.
He's very young, because he's really very young. When you say he's young, or say he's, for example, old or very old, all these will be depending on your description. So now that's what we mean by relative. We're describing the attribute relatively. And when we say absolute, it's just a given label, like just a guess or something like that. So the total of the global biometric are 6 attributes. They are descriptive with their descriptive label. Okay, we use them for annotation and for feature level fusion or augmenting the face recognition in both in identification and verification. And finally, you can see, unlike the existing research, what's the new here? What we mentioned actually about using the age in with 2 different forms of description, and using also the skin color with 2 different forms of description. So now here, we emphasize also the distinct, the difference about this paper, actually, the difference about this paper, which is, using the labels simultaneously. We're not using them alternatively, just using one of them without the other, but we use them both because they means that they have actually different power and different integration information for identification and verification. So they have different valuable information, and they will be, exploited in this recognition to show you how good they are when they integrate and collaborate with each other. So also here, this is one thing to be emphasized. In case, what's useful and what is good, also regarding the one who's making the label, regarding the one who's annotating the picture. For example, when you show a face for a person, and you try now to put the suitable label. So using the nominal label will be more convenient and more easy. It will be just like a trivial job to do, just to give someone, when he's very clear, to say he's infant, or he's, for example, a senior, okay? But in the way when the person is confusing, you cannot actually recognize how old is he, or for example, you cannot recognize, for example, the exact skin color. You cannot just group it. You feel that his skin color is in between 2 different hues. So that's why you can use different form, which is the relative form. So this is an example showing you, for example, it's upward case, for example, for the gentleman showing here, that's his face, it's absolutely seen, for sure. So no doubt, anyone can say it's seen. Okay? Selecting the proper label from the age group. And also, it's very clear, you can just relatively say he's very old. Okay? Maybe someone will just, argue and say he's old. Maybe there are some people who are very old and getting older than him, but he's still very old is acceptable for almost everyone. Okay, but for this one, is it a confusing face or a confusing subject showing the face, for example? So is he a young adult or adult? Sometimes you're not sure enough. In this case, the relative attribute will be working better, will be giving them more trust and more convenient to say he's relatively young. Okay? Yeah, for clear, he's not very young. He's not medium. I can say young, convenient. Okay? So here again, we have to emphasize the other point, which is a good point about using the 2 forms of description, the absolute and the relative one. Here we can also and actually we can show that one of them actually majoring some scalability. It has some scalability, or it has actually a scale. This scale is showing that how strong is the attribute for that person, for example, for that subject. So when you describe or when you assign some label, you should consider that when, in the case of absolute, the order is not, it's not important, and it doesn't matter. Whatever you have, I mean order, because they are not order, they are just a mere, actually mere label. But in case when you have them actually inverted, they should have some kind of ordering, which is, for example, labeling using integer number ranging from 1 to 5. This is the use database, it's a well-known database, Ferret database, and it has been used here actually because it has some datasets and some grouping already made in standard division for the database to examine your algorithm actually in different difficulties like phase expression, low aging, illumination, and high aging of the subject. And you can see here in the 4 images, the first image showing the gallery and showing the training image, one sample of the training image, and the other 4 images showing you the testing, a sample from each dataset and testing database. Okay, and this is just a recap for what we have made regarding generating 24 filter, the size of 64 by 64. Okay, and the 4 different scales, 3, 4, 5, up to 6, and also with 6 different orientation to have these filters which are demonstrated here in front of you. So here is just showing you just the steps for the previous processing that has been applied. So we have the raw face image, some face detection, pre-processing is applied, normalization, then it moves actually after converting this image to be transformed using the fast Fourier transform. Then after that, after the transformation, the transformed image will be convoluted actually using the convolution with each of the 24 gable filters. Okay? After that, for sure, we should have actually some inverse for the feature for fast Fourier transform, and we have applied some special and some new feature selection, which is based on dimensionality reduction. And here you can see actually the form that we have prepared for collecting the soft parameter. This is a website, actually, it's a platform called Figure 8. This platform is used for crowdsourcing. You can set up and you can design your form, add your picture, and show the task, explain everything, give the information for the crowdsourcing people. So it will be just geographically distributed for the people, so there is no restriction for the time. You can control these things, but yeah, we left it just as is. So the each contributor was shown actually between 12 to 15 randomly shown subjects to be annotated. Annotating the subject by selecting the correct label or the suitable label for each of the attributes that we have talked about, which are the gender, the ethnicity, age level, age group, then the scale color, finally the skeleton. So we end with this. Sorry, not very far. Okay, so for this actually now, for the quality control, we have used all the possible quality controlling that is in the which are built in actually in the platform. Then we added some other special consideration to make sure that the quality of the data and that we are collecting the data we need for the recognition. Okay, so we have controlled the trusted annotator only because we can restrict the work. It cannot be just given to anyone. The judgment per annotator, we limited the maximum number of judgment. Also the pre-test. Every annotator will have a test. This test will allow him to take the real annotation or just to say thank you for them and yeah, don't do anything because you are not understanding, for example, the joke or something. Okay? For detecting the randomization, if someone just he wants to earn money, because this platform giving money for each one was annotating. It's some kind of motivating the people to annotate. So randomization will be detected extra fast. So some people just making this labeling very fast without concentrating, which is not good for annotation. So that's why we automatically detect that. And we finally added the geographically unconstrained contributor, so we can make sure for better reflecting the average human annotation, because we would like to even for different level of understanding, and we would like to reflect that in our self-parametric modeling, and for better modeling for that self-parametric space. Okay. So the summary of collected data was for each one of the subjects we have in the database, 993. We have a unique phase, or different unique phase actually, which 3048. The number of annotators, total number was 336, and the total number of labels collected from the crowdsourcing was 30,204. Then after that, we moved forward. Here we're showing the results. So the blue line showing you the blue curve actually showing you the performance of the traditional Gable face recognition. Okay, but the red one showing you after adding these software and fusing them in feature level with the traditional ones, the performance is getting better. And from two perspectives, we are examining here the identification. So if you focus just on the identification performance, you can see that the cumulative match score is getting higher, and it's showing better performance even by the first shot, which is the best guess, okay, which is at rank number 1. And also the average rank, by all means, it shows better performance than the traditional way, even though we are using only 6 source biometrics. Okay, and here you can see the verification performance. For the verification performance, we focus on some metrics which are very famous and well-known standard measurement for biometric system. The equal error rate showing very low, which is lower error than the one caused by the traditional performance. And also the area under the curve showing that adding soft biometrics improving the result and showing less error and less area of confusion. And also we see here the decidability indexing, which is this one, and the average F1, which is the measurement also showing the trade-offs between two measurements for the characteristics, showing all improvement. And here is just a summary showing you how good are they in all the variability we had in our database. So this is showing some kind of community. Even when you change the database, you change the number of trained data, you change the number of tested, and even you change the condition of those images. So the soft biometrics showing some immunity for these changes. So against the facial expression, the low aging, illumination, and high aging. All these changes doesn't affect the performance of the soft biometric, but they still, the superiority of the soft global biometrics has been shown along with all the measurements, as you can see the bolded line here, so showing the performance, and this one, the normal one, showing the traditional Gable algorithm. So the conclusion, the fusion of soft biometric with hard biometric offers more advantages over using hard biometrics alone for sure. So, and also, they provide actually increased discriminatory and also immunity against changes such as facial expression, pose, illumination, and aging at different levels, low and high. So on the future level, also the soft face traits actually with traditional Gable-based traits significantly augments actually by all means the human face recognition even under common challenges like what we have seen in the earlier slides. And finally, they indicate now the remarkable improvement in both identification and verification as we applied in this paper. For the future work, proposed global soft biometric can be used in the future actually for augmentation scheme, and forensic scenarios, different ones. We can change actually the conditions and add more difficulties to examine the potency and the power of such biometrics in augmentation. And also, in addition, other possible fine-grained soft face traits can be added, and we can see also the power of soft biometric in augmenting the traditional one. And they can be used in fusion for augmentation actually, and combination with different and variety actually of traditional face biometric, leading to enhanced face recognition system. This is the end of my presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. Ahmed? Okay, it was very interesting subject, but I have a question before I give the speech for our audience.
Okay.
What about the black skin? I mean, did you try to use this type of the data set for this system or not? I mean, with black skin,
Yeah.
is there any problem or not?
Yeah, I mean, it will be the same if I just selected a database for people from the same race, for example. If I take a database where they are all, Asian people, or for example, Europe people, for example, Western or Eastern, even all black people, it will be the same case. For sure, there will be a big similarity between them. So the distribution of the data will be not a normal distribution. So it will affect that, but even though we are not using a single attribute, we're using actually a combination of attributes, so they are interacting with each other. We still can differentiate between ages, even if they are all, for example, with dark skins or something, people with dark skins or white skins. It doesn't matter, because we have different attributes, like the age, like the race tag, for example, they will be for sure from the same race maybe. But yeah, I can still differentiate and use the other attributes. That's why I mentioned actually regarding the future work, we can add some other facial attribute. So maybe the facial mark or some other attributes which can augment and find. So this is just a try to see whether it will be working when you get or not. Because I haven't seen even in the literature so many people just working and adding soft to the game features.
So, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Are there questions to him?
Yes.
Okay, please.
Hi, I'm from Frat University in the UK. Your topic is very interesting. I wonder, in your study, you are using case data, and did you try it for any body organs? For example, if you show your body hands, your system works or not?
Maybe you are talking about, for example, in disaster cases when, for example, airplane crashes or whatever, we will have just some parts, fragments of human. So in such thing, actually, it works. Actually, it has some Interpol. Actually, they are using some form. Have you seen that before? They use form. They describe really tiny things. Actually, even if they found, for example, sorry about describing that, a hand, which is a cut hand, for example, cutted hand. You can see that hand. They can even describe if there is a scratch on it. What was the watch on the hand? These are somehow so private, and they will be helpful for finding out who's this hand is it related to someone we know or something? They are trying to identify him. Even using the DNA, these are traditional ones, but these kind of someone, because they will ask the families. What was your, for example, relative wearing? So what was his clothing? Is he wearing the watch in the right hand or the left hand? This is very useful information. Maybe not for us here, but yeah, in such cases, in some accidents, they will be very, very useful and useful. So I haven't applied that, but because this is not in our scope in this research, but it can be useful for such cases. If you are talking now, if you are thinking about designing some system for such things, like certain, I mean, recognizing people not basically, I mean, depending on their face, you use different parts of organs of the body, it will be very useful. Yeah, that's exactly.
Thank you. One more question.
My name is Victor. I'm from Samara University, Russia. Could you tell a few words about your classification technique used which uses your software?
Yeah, I use the K-Nielsen, very simple one. What is it? The K-Nielsen. K-Nielsen. K-Nielsen classifier. It's a very simple one because I'm not interested in, for example, finding the better or the optimized classifier.
And for number features, you also use K?
Everything on it. Thank you. I haven't used neural network or SVM, for example. That's
I think it is enough.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And now your self key, please go there.
Okay.
I don't know. You have to say please.
Okay, thank you so much.
Again.
Thank you.
Now your turn. Yes, presentation and attendance. Thank you. What would I do because I have to check my. Okay, now the title is Analysis of how we needed behind firewalls to make sense. And then, can you introduce yourself from which institution are you?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zhang Zhiqing from the University of Tokyo. Today I will present our work titled Risk Analysis on Malware Hidden Behind Firewalls with Backscans. First, I will introduce the background and motivation of our work. Currently, the security of IoT systems has long been an important consideration. The cyber attacks reach the host and force the host to propagate malware into other devices. This will pose a really serious threat on the normal work of local area network. And currently, we can observe that many hosts are installing firewalls to protect themselves. But in this case, we can also observe that the malware can intrude into the host that is protected by firewalls. This happens when malware intrudes into the host from another open port which is not protected. If we could know the status of TCP ports on infected hosts, we could learn the malware intrusion behaviors across firewalls. If the port is open on the remote host, the target port, we consider it is highly likely that the malware intrudes the host through this port. But if the port is closed or filtered, but another port is open, we consider probably the malware intrudes into the target host through the open port. Then I will introduce the existing approaches and research issues. There are several approaches for malware analysis. One promising approach is to passively analyze packets from malware. The honeypots not only passively wait for the malware intrusion happens, but also actively responds to pull more information. The internet motion sensors work in a similar way when the scale is expanded to a distributed and globally scaled monitoring system. And also, we consider our research issues. One of the issues is that the attacks will not continue if SYN reset is received after TCP SYN, so we want to pull more information. And also, for our back scan, we need to define different port status, and also vertical back scanning will be blocked by intrusion block systems. And also, we should choose and filter. We should filter those hosts that are not appropriate or available for backscan. Our method, ISDFS, will solve these problems. Then I will introduce the design of our method. This is an overview of our method. Our monitoring hosts continuously receive the scans on our ports, and then we first profile the remote host, and then we perform backscan to the host. We classify the host according to the result of backscan. I will introduce each part in details in the following. We analyze received packets from the streams of packets and extract the attack source information. Then we log the malware property in a malware log. Before that, we need some configuration on our monitoring host, because normally closed ports refuse any connection. In this way, we want to pull more information, so we utilize the SCIP2. We first close all the TCP ports on our host, and then we use the SCIP2 to counterfeit TCP SYN ACK packets. And then in this way, we can pretend that all our TCP ports are open, and we are ready to receive any attack from the internet. From the malware, we extract a remote IP address, local IP address, remote host number, local host number, and timestamp. This is an example. It is a malware log saved in a JSON format. Normally, infected hosts spread the malware at the same port as it itself is infected. For example, in this way, the malware, one of the infected hosts scans other hosts using the port PX, and it just sends SYN packets. And when a host is not infected, but it is open on the port PX, when it receives SYN packet, it can respond SYN ACK packets, and then this TCP connection is set up. It is highly likely that the new host is infected by the newly set up TCP connection. This is why we need to perform our active backscan. If our monitoring host receives an attack on port PX, we want to know that if port PX is open on the remote host. So we scan PX on the remote host. This is what we see port backscanning. For port backscanning, we use nmap commands and define different port status. Nmap command first sends TCP SYN packets to the remote host. If the port is open, it will respond TCP SYN ACK. If it's closed, it will respond TCP ACK. And if we cannot get no response, this usually means that our TCP packets are blocked by the remote host, which means that the port is filtered. And there is issue that vertical port scanning, which means that we will scan many ports in a short period to the remote host. Is with vertical port scanning, why our back scanning is necessary? This is because vertical port scanning can be blocked by intrusion detection systems, which will give a different result with our port back scanning. If we get the filtered or closed result from port back scanning, the question is how the malicious host is infected. As I have talked in the background part, we consider it is highly likely that the host is infected through another open port. So we want to verify this by our vertical back scanning. If my local host was scanned at port PX, then we scan all the ports on the remote host, including PX. This is what we call vertical port scanning. And then after that, we classify the remote host according to the results of port back scanning and vertical port scanning. The first case, the host performing vertical scanning. This means that in some cases, a same host scans many ports in a short period. This kind of hosts are not appropriate to perform backscan to because usually they are not malicious. They are just scanning for the status of hosts on the internet. Case 2, the hosts are with carrier grade NIT. In some cases, we can receive attacks from various IP addresses in a short period, but the IP address only changes slightly. This usually means that the host is hiding behind a carrier grade NIT, and we cannot perform backscan to them because we can only get the global IP address and we cannot reach the host itself. And to detect these two kinds of cases, they have a similarity that they both have this in a burst. We first filter these two cases by applying clean burst detection, and then from the 4 situations, only the first one, retransmission, is available to perform backscan to. And case 3, host infected because it exposes malware targeted port. This happens when our port backscanning gives results open on the remote host. Case 4, host protecting target port but infected from another port. This happens when our port back scanning gives the result of filtered and closed, but vertical port scanning shows that another port is open on the remote host. Maybe it's highly probably that a remote host is infected by the open ports. And the last case, case 5, host protecting all ports but still infected. This happens when port back scanning gives the result of filtered and closed, and vertical port scanning shows that all ports are closed or filtered on the host. This usually means that the host is entirely protected by firewalls or other tools. With this kind of classification, we can discover the malware intruding into a host even across the firewalls, and also beyond that, we can imply that which port it utilized for intrusion. And then I will go on to introduce our experiments. During our 2-week experiment, ISDFS, our methods got an average of 2,556 malicious attack sessions for each day. From the 8,704 subnets, 201 performed vertical scanning, and 182 are with carrier grade NIT. The attacks are from different sources. We investigate the attack IP address and show the country distribution here. And also for TCP ports, 13,948 ports are detected to be aimed at during the experiment. Top 8 ports who receive most attack sessions are performed here. Port 23 for Telnet is observed receiving more than 7.5% of attack sessions. In our experiments, we conduct port scanning for each session. The result shows that among all the sessions, only 24.8% shows that the port is open, and 23.8% shows the port is filtered, and 71.4% shows the port is closed. For the ports attracting most attacks, although the 8 ports, most of them are more likely to open on the remote host. This is reasonable because we have seen a huge number of malware targets at these ports, and when their vulnerability by continuously open status is discovered. There are
statement. For the attack type described in studies, it's sufficient to describe the OSI layer up to level 4. CAM table stands for Content Addressable Memory. CAM table stores information such as MAC address available on physical port with their associated VLAN parameters. CAM table have a fixed size.
The opportunity to do some of banking transactions over the internet through the system called Comlink by the connection of Hong Kong and television. Then SMS and started to be used first mobile banking service in 1999. Then the rapid development of technology since the first use of online banking has led the rapid development of online and mobile banking. Two-factor authentication is introduced to open mobile banking applications. Then banking features such as examination of account balance, EFT transactions, sending money to ATM, withdrawing by reading QR code are basic online and mobile banking features. And nowadays, most of users using mobile and online banking applications, yes, the global proportion of registered mobile banking users has increased to 39 in 1970 to 42% in 2018. Mobile and online banking threats and security solutions. Security is important for mobile and online banking. We said that despite taking security measures in mobile and online banking, it's known that there may be security vulnerabilities. According to MQA service, security is a major problem in the adoption of mobile banking. Approximately 72% of respondents state that they are concerned about the safety of access to financial data. For example, my dad, I asked to him last week, I said download a mobile application and use it. He never accepts because he said it's not safe. I can go bank and I can complete my transactions in there. So this shows that mobile banking is still not used safely by the users. Financial companies need to identify various security vulnerabilities for mobile and online banking. However, mobile and online banking are known to have different security vulnerabilities. Mobile banking is weaker than online banking because it uses various operating systems like iOS, Android, BlackBerry. It's more difficult and complicated to take security measures for every mobile banking applications. These are mobile threats divided into 3 groups: attacks to device, attacks to network, attacks to data center. First, we should know them. Then we we will examine mobile banking threats. For social engineering, it's most commonly used attack type that doesn't require any computer systems. Voice phishing. Phishing especially targets the mobile applications. In 2014, United Kingdom bank customers lost $24 million from phishing attacks. Port scanners. Attackers can use port scanners to identify entry points to a system. Packet sniffers, password cracking, Trojans, these are important, especially Trojans. In terms of e-commerce security, Trojan software is considered the most harmful attack. In a research using the now Secure Lab automated tool to assess the security threats in mobile banking, totally 30 mobile banking applications revealed for iOS and Android operating system, and 708 tests made on these applications. What are the results? One of the major security risks encountered in Android's operating system, creating word-returnable files. In other words, permission for writing of other application files. This is available in 33% of the banking application in Android operating system. Performing proper certificate is important, and this is not performing on 13% of banking applications on Android. But iOS operating system performs proper certificate validation. Percentage of the banking applications running in the Android operating system do not hide source code, which can be processed in reverse engineering. This is an important vulnerability. About 40% of the applications running on the iOS operating system is shown that HTTP only flag is not set properly, and this allows cookies to be accessed by client. These are security risks for mobile banking, and these groups mobile devices, web server, and new technologies. For example, for mobile device, if SMS are not encrypted, SMS spoofing attack maybe measures to be taken for security risks are important after understanding the security vulnerabilities. In a study for Tay banks, the criteria for mobile and online banking security are encryption and digital certificate. This is important. Upgrading from standard to extended validation SSL certificate will provide a better alternative of banks' existing SSL certificate. Login information, providing daily information like login and login logs are important for information security. Logon requirements, in addition to ID and password building, CAPTCHA and two-factor authentication provide additional security measure. Logon user input type. This is about using virtual keyboards for the user. Login with a password and changing the position of the letters is an important security measure. Password requirements. This includes the difficulty of the password, session management, and two-factor authentication. One-time password devices are usually a second authentication factor that can be requested in certain or random situations. situations. And some models are described in another study. Browser protection model is used to detect malicious software and prevent to be stolen sensitive information. Device registering model, previously known and registered devices are used to access to mobile banking. A detailed passport login information is required when pairing with different devices. Positive identification model can be used as a second identification method. The user needs to enter some secret information about that's only known by him. Transaction monitoring model has been implemented almost all banking system. Fraud models are described by analyzing of the transaction history with artificial intelligence applications. But about these models, there are some weaknesses. OTP passwords, one-time passwords may be captured and used in real time. The password can be exceeded from the user by social engineering, browser protection, some fake online banking web pages that prevent browser protection, loading correctly may cause the user enter their passwords in an unsafe environment. Virtual keyboards, screen loaders or mouse loaders may capture it. Device registering. CAPTCHA, it's possible to extract information from the image with some OCR software. Short messages can be stolen by changing their phone number with the user. Positive identification information that's known only by the user may be leaked by social engineering methods. What can we do? Antivirus software on mobile device must be installed and updated. Non-secure links that are considered to be sent from banks don't be clicked, and personal information should not be shared over such links. Applications should be downloaded to mobile devices only through their official app store. They are split by Apple, Amazon, and Google. Account balances should be checked at least once a month. One-time password and biometric features like fingerprint, voice, or facial recognition must be used if the mobile application supports it. Completion, while banks continue to take new and stronger security measures for mobile and online banking applications, new technologies are developing and malicious people with various methods, and they will continue to search these security vulnerabilities. For this reason, banks are required to carry out all safety tests, especially penetration tests, in every step. According to fraud survey, 145 banks by the American Bankers Association, large banks are more likely to be targeted by the fraudsters than community or mid-sized banks. So, developed banks should take more security measures more strictly. Biometric recognition systems may be used in mobile banking applications. Banks are advising users not to connect to phishing links from fraudsters and not to share one-time passwords with anybody, includes bank staff. In this regard, it can be suggested that these fake links, which are shown as advertisements, especially on social media, can also be identified and provided by banks. Thank you for listening.
Questions? Okay, ask questions.
No.
No? Arda, do you want to ask a question?
No.
No? But you
No.
raised your hand.
No, I did this.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Nilay. And this is your certificate.
So can I have one question?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Can someone overcome some of these issues regarding the online banking using the mobile phone by using the browser through the mobile? I mean, is it safer just to use the normal browser? And
Yes.
login using the normal, page, even the desktop view is sometimes safer and has more security than the mobile one.
Yes,
So is it
online
a
banking
solution?
is secure than mobile banking
Yeah.
because I said lots of operating systems in there
Yeah.
and
You mean safer than using
Yes.
the app interface? I mean, Android app
Yes.
interface with
it's difficult to secure
More secure.
this mobile devices. Yes.
What about saying, some people say the antivirus sometimes is the main virus in your device. So is that right or not?
I use it.
Yeah, because sometimes
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm using iOS, but I think it's safer than Android. Yes.
Just people always
Search
have
about
this
it.
argument, just companies.
Maybe. Thank you.
Okay, it was the last presentation. And today session is end. And at 7 o'clock we have gala dinner. I think it is not so far, about 15 minutes by walking. And we can go together. And now, have a nice evening.
Şeyi kapatayım mı hocam?
I was vice president for the internationalization of the institute, and I organized an international week. And Asaf was a very active participant, always taking photographs and getting involved with everybody. And we got a sympathy immediately. And on that year, Asaf invited my institute to be part of the organization of ISDFS. And it is with a great pleasure that we accepted that invitation, and that this year Asaf proposed us to be the organizers of one edition in Portugal, and we are very glad. We worked a little bit, we have done our best. We hope you are enjoying, but it was a great pleasure for us to collaborate with this great team shared by Asaf Varol. It's a great pleasure, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. She accepted my offer at that time immediately. I was very happy to hearing that she wants to be a member of this consortium. And thank you again, Maria.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A small announcement that I need to make about Wednesday's trip. The cost is 25 euros per individual. It covers the lunch as well. If you are interested, once again, you need to see the registration desk by tomorrow noon and write your name. to the west.
And what about the trip? Can you give some information about the trip route? Do you know that?
That's something I don't know. I think that
Maria, do you have a route about the trip route?
I think that the person that best knows the route is Sandro.
Sandro,
Because he
can you
organized-
explain to where we are going?
So, we will start the trip here in Barcelos. We have a bus from here to Esposende, something like 13-14 kilometers maximum. And we will visit an really old town with a guide. It's an amazing place. I've been there a lot of times. We'll also visit the Rio Cabo that we will see there. The end of the river is there in Esposende. So we have a trip in the boat. We see all the end of the river. It's a really beautiful place to go.
Okay, thank you, Sandro.